I always considered myself a healthy person, but a few years ago I started reading food labels and was completely shocked by some of the ingredients. That's when I decided I needed to become more aware of what I eat and where it comes from. On this episode of The Natural Princess, we'll indulge my love of fall in New England by delving into a fall classic, apples. First, we'll learn if, in fact, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Then we'll go apple picking at a local orchard. And finally, we'll meet in the kitchen to whip up a couple of simple, savory, and sweet dishes. From tart to sweet and from green to yellow to red, there's pretty much a type of apple out there to suit everyone's tastes. We know they're good for us, but what about that old adage? Does an apple a day really keep the doctor away?
An apple a day really does keep the doctor away. Apples are one of the most nutritious fruits you can eat.
So what's so good in apples?
Well, apples are loaded with fiber, first of all. There's 3 to 5 grams of fiber in every apple. They're a type of fiber called pectin, which is a soluble fiber, and it helps to lower cholesterol, and it's very good for preventing cardiovascular disease.
What else?
Apples are loaded with phytochemicals. There are compounds in the peels of apples that are colorful, such as quercetin and catechin. And these are important because they are antioxidants. They're very powerful antioxidants. They're really important for protecting us from cardiovascular disease, for lowering our risk of cancer. They're actually phytochemicals that have been found to lower our risk of asthma.
What about some recent studies that have been done about apples?
Pregnant women who eat a lot of apples have a lower risk of allergies and asthma in their children. Their children have less incidence of those illnesses. And if you are asthmatic, it can decrease the amount of attacks you have if you eat a lot of apples.
I had no idea.
The flavonoids in apples, the quercetin, is antihistamine. So that's one reason why they're good for allergies.
So have there been any other studies about apples?
Well, there was one study in Brazil that found that the women who ate the most apples had the highest amount of weight lost, so they could aid in weight loss. Also, the Nurses' Health Study found that if you eat a lot of apples, it decreases your risk of lung cancer.
Neat. What else is in apples?
There's boron in apples. Boron is a trace mineral that's not found in a lot of foods. Boron is important for protecting us from osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. Apples are one of the richest sources.
So you mentioned the peels, and that was a big question, is to peel or not to peel? Because I know a lot of people who do, and I almost never do.
I would say definitely leave the peels on, because most of the phytochemicals that are protective are in the peels. And if you peel an apple, you're removing half of the nutrients in the apple.
So they really are little powerhouses.
They really are.
How much should we eat of something like apples?
I think that just depends. You know, an apple a day, that would be okay with me.
That's awesome. Okay, so an apple a day really can help keep the doctor away. And to me, there's nothing like biting into a crisp, fresh-picked apple. Up next, we'll get in on the fun at a local orchard that's bursting with delicious, ecologically grown fruit. I love the fall, and one of my favorite things to do is go apple picking. And I have found the perfect spot here at High Hill Orchard in Meriden, Connecticut. Kind of a history of the orchard and how you got into farming.
My great-grandfather, around the turn of the century, around 1900, started to work with peaches because it was a new fruit that they discovered could be raised in this climate of Connecticut. They interplanted apples with peaches, so that when the peaches died out within 20 years or so, that's about the lifespan of a peach tree, that the apples were already set and established and ready to go. Then the apples took over in the 30s, and my grandfather kind of got to be known as the apple man in New Haven. He would go to every mom and pop store on every corner. My father bought this place and kind of started on his own in the 1940s. Then in the mid-80s we started a little bit of the retail business, and then also in the 90s or so we got into selling some to the school systems. The public schools are taking local produce a little bit more than they used to. I've noticed probably the last 3 years, 3 or 4, are beginning to start to get in touch with local food. I don't know why everybody got shut off from it to begin with, other than there was an attitude that everybody should have cheap food to eat all the time. I think everybody should grow everything they can themselves, that within reason. We grow fruit because I know it's something that it's a little more complicated to grow than vegetables. It takes years of experience to know what to do and what not to do and what you can get away with. What I've learned to do over the course of years is look at the health and nutrition of the plant, the trees. There's a whole symbiotic relationship between the microbes and the fungal life in the soil that you have to keep in balance. The only things you need to add to are the minerals. Make sure that there's enough electrolytes to keep the relationship between the microbes and the plants going on the way they should, the give and the take.
Right, so you have to maintain that balance and you don't have to do anything drastic.
Yes.
So let's talk about apples.
Yeah.
What are all the different kinds you grow here?
Well, we have about 13 different varieties. We have some of the ones that you might know are Macintosh, Cortland, McCowan, Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, and some of the lesser known ones are like John Gold, Liberty. There's a whole bunch of varieties that require no fungicide, and that's Liberty, and there's one called Freedom, another one's a Mac Free, and then Nova Easy Grow. Those are the 4 varieties that I have that are excellent. So all I have to worry about on those varieties is insect damage, and just get away with a very minimal amount of spray on those.
Give me a tip for how to pick a good apple.
Well, I tend to look for color. If it's red and it has a yellow background, then I know it's ripe. Or a whitish background instead of that dark green. If you find an apple that has a dark green background and it still has a red blush, it's maybe not as ripe as it could be. But it's all in someone's taste too.
So out of all the varieties you grow, what's your favorite? Or are they all just good?
That's a good question. Everybody asks, and what I tell everybody is that each apple has its season. I like certain apples at certain times.
Well, I definitely have enough apples here to last me for quite a while, and I cannot wait to get home and make some of my favorite apple dishes. So now it's time to do something with all those apples I got from High Hill Orchard. First up is a pork tenderloin with apples and onions. It's a really delicious recipe and it always reminds me of fall. So the first thing we have to do is slice our onion. You're going to want really thin half moons. Ooh, really strong onion. And that's that. So next we want to slice the apple. I keep the peel on, I don't think it's a big deal. I like the extra flavor it adds. And you want to slice about 2 medium-sized apples. And I know that there are certain apples that are better for baking, there are better ones that you just eat fresh, but for this dish, I just use whatever apples I happen to have on hand. Okay, so now we've got our apples, and I just want to mix them around. And now I just want to sprinkle it with about a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil and just a little bit of salt. And I would say just about a pinch or two, not too much. Now we take 2 cloves of garlic and coarsely chop them. You want the pieces to be big enough for you to be able to pick up, because this is going to be our little secret to our pork. And push those to the side of your cutting board. Now it's time to get our pork. And before I bring it over, I'm just going to put a little salt and pepper on it. I have a grain-fed piece of pork here. It's often difficult to find organic meats, and if you do, they're often really expensive. So just do the best you can. You can look for grain-fed, pasture-fed. Make sure there's no antibiotics or hormones injected into the animals, because what they eat is what you're gonna wind up eating too. So next what we wanna do is cut a pair of slits all the way down the top of the meat. And this is to stuff those pieces of garlic into. And this is always really nice because the garlic then permeates the meat while it cooks, and it's just like this burst of garlic flavor. So when we take our pieces and just stuff them into those holes. So now that I've done that, I'm gonna pick up the whole tenderloin and nest it into our apples and onions. Now it's time to wash my hands. I have half a cup of apple cider. You could also use apple juice, and you just want to pour it over the whole entire thing. This is sort of my secret ingredient, okay? We're going to rub 2 tablespoons of whole grain mustard onto the top of the pork tenderloin and the sides too. And again, your best tool, your hands. Okay, that looks pretty good on there. So to top everything off, once you've got your mustard rubbed on there, is half a teaspoon of dried thyme. And I just sprinkle this over the entire dish. So I've already gone ahead and preheated my oven to 350. So now it's time to put our pork in there, and you're gonna wanna cook this until it reaches 160 degrees in the meat, which is probably about 50 minutes to an hour. But before I put it in, I'm gonna insert my meat thermometer so I can accurately measure how hot it is. So I've inserted my meat thermometer, and now pop it into the oven. About halfway through cooking, you want to take a turkey baster or a spoon and get some of that liquid up from the bottom of the roasting pan and just sort of spread it or squirt it on top of the pork. But now, all we have to do is wait. My meat thermometer just beeped to let me know that the pork is at the right temperature. It's done. Let's get it out of the oven. Pork tenderloin with apples and onions. Next is dessert, apple cranberry crisp. And this is definitely not low fat, so portion control. First, we're gonna slice 3 apples. I am preheating my oven to 350 degrees. And we're just gonna put all of our apple slices into a large bowl. And this apple crisp recipe is just so quick and so easy, and it's delicious. So it's a really good thing to entertain with, or if you're going to a potluck supper, just bring this. Okay, so our apples are done. We need 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. And you want to firmly pack it in. Just 1. And there's 2. And you need a tablespoon of flour. I use wheat flour. And you don't have to be too careful with measuring for this. Just sprinkle that over the top. And I have 3/4 of a cup of dried cranberries. And if possible, try to find dried cranberries that aren't sweetened. They're a little bit more tart, and sometimes they're a little bit more hard to find, but they're definitely better than anything that's got corn syrup or added sugar in it. This dish is sweet enough as it is. And now, this is my secret ingredient, orange oil. If you have an orange, you can just zest the whole orange and put it in here. But when I made this recipe initially, I didn't have a fresh orange, but I had this, and it just added this really amazing citrusy background flavor. And I just measure it into the cap, and 1 capful, and that is it. And now let's use my favorite utensils in the kitchen and mix this around. You want to make sure you coat the apples and the cranberries with that flour and brown sugar. Once you've got that tossed around, pour it into your baking dish. So once you've got your apple mixture in the baking dish, spread it out so it's relatively even in the dish, and you're gonna pour 1/2 cup of apple cider or apple juice over the top of everything. Okay, so to make our topping, it's really easy proportions. We're gonna start with 1/2 cup of whole wheat flour. And again, you don't have to measure too specifically, okay? Next, 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And again, you wanna nice, tightly pack it in there. And if you have them, toasted oats work really well in this recipe. Okay. And I have 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon here. And I'm just gonna mix this around a little bit before I add the butter. Okay. And this is 3/4 of a stick of butter. I know it's a lot of butter, but it's important for the crisp. Okay. If you have a pastry blender, by all means use it for this. You could just use a fork, you could just use your fingers. And you want to get it crumbly. Okay, we're done blending, and now it's time to pour our topping over our apples. You want to make sure you coat every corner. I mean, the best part about apple crisp, it's got to be the crisp. Maybe the apples. Now we pop this into an oven for about 50 minutes at 350. You want the top to be nice and golden brown, and the apples to be tender when they're pierced with a fork. The smell of apple crisp is filling the kitchen. It's done and ready to take out. Apple cranberry crisp. Well, this looks like an amazing feast. It's important to savor the flavors of every season, but to me, the sights and smells of a New England fall can't be beat. You know, we really are what we eat. We should treat ourselves like royalty, using only the best nature has to offer. So from this natural princess to you, eat well and be well. I'll see you next time.